The Explore the Tropics event is in full swing now at Whole Foods Market. It's a celebration of tropical fruits throughout the store, starting with great deals on fresh, juicy seasonal produce. There's a new melty tropical heat pizza only at Whole Foods Market through March. And that famous mango yuzu chantilly cake is finally back in the bakery department. You'll also find tempting tropical marinated proteins in their meat and seafood departments. Explore the tropics today at Whole Foods Market.
Even before its recent legalization through Measure 109, Portland has had a long history of under-the-table psychedelic therapy. Gabe K-S is the founder of Rhizome, a communal space in Portland where he facilitates people having their own psychedelic experiences. So today on CityCast Portland, we're talking with him about how he's seen the psychedelic community change as legalization comes into play. It's Monday, March 27th. I'm Claudia Meza, and this is what Portland's talking about. So before we get into it, could you help define what the difference is between recreational and therapeutic psychedelic drug use?
That is an excellent question. As far as I understand it, therapeutic drug use is drug use with a stated purpose to sort of address or alleviate some sort of issue, whether it's physical or mental. In the case of psychedelics, it's typically for mental illnesses, although that's changing. Recreational drug use is drug use for the sake of pleasure, connection, togetherness, fun. I actually think there's quite a bit more overlap between the two than people would care to admit.
I ask you because you live between both of these worlds. You're a psychedelic guide. So what goes into guiding someone through a psychedelic journey?
Yeah, I prefer to call myself a facilitator only in as much as guide implies like that I'm somehow directing the experience. A lot of what goes into it is just building a safe container for a person to have a really intense and revelatory experience in. So I'm there sort of to hold down the fort, as it were, in consensus reality while they explore these different dimensions of their internal world. I also do a lot of verbal processing with them, usually on the tail end of the experience when they're able to use language again. They come back and we have really nuanced and rich conversations about what they felt and what they saw and how we can apply those things to their normal, sober, waking lives.
Do you have a rough number maybe of how many of these facilitations you've conducted?
Yeah, so I do. I have a working, every time I hold a session, I take note. And I think I'm at 111 or 112 experiences.
Wow. So having that much knowledge, what myths are there that you want to dispel?
So many. I would say that first and foremost, the very pervasive myth that these things are dangerous. They are dangerous in as much as a car or a book of matches is dangerous, which is to say, if you use them recklessly and carelessly and irresponsibly, there will be consequences. But we don't go about banning matches or cars. We entrust them in the hands of people who know how to use them properly. And when you know how to use one properly, of course, it's not a guarantee that nothing's going to go wrong. But on the whole, these are very safe, physically and emotionally very safe compounds. And yeah, I mean, a lot of what I do with people, honestly, Claudia, is just like reminding them that their own internal worlds are full of things both good and bad and frightening and comforting, and that there's really nothing to fear about facing the self if you look at it with compassion and with honesty.
What substances are you using for these facilitations?
Yeah, so I mainly work with psilocybin-containing mushrooms,
Mm-hmm.
but I also work with a compound called MDMA, methylene dioxymethamphetamine, and a compound called DMT or dimethyltryptamine. Those are the big three that I work with.
So what kinds of things have you seen happen to people during these experiences?
I've seen a very wide spectrum of responses in these containers. I've seen people have what to the outside observer looks like a very peaceful and almost kind of a boring and uninteresting experience where they're just eyes closed, fully in their internal world, not communicating. I've seen people go into what's called a regress state. So really sort of turn the timeline back in their lives and act out
Like
some.
they're acting like a kid?
Yeah.
Like a child?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. That's often the case if people have really severe trauma, they'll regress. I've seen people have really intense somatic responses to these medicines. So their bodies will react in really interesting ways, shaking, sweating. And I've also seen people, especially men, interestingly enough, sort of encounter themselves as if for the first time. So meet themselves like they're meeting a stranger because they've spent a lot of time alienated from their internal worlds.
Repressing their emotions.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's why I feel like most men, when you're telling someone, oh, you look really stressed out, and they're like, no, I'm not. And I feel like that's such a, like, I feel like there's every man does that when you're just, well, you're yelling right now, so you seem upset. I'm perfectly fine.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, and that stuff doesn't fly in the psychedelic space. So that kind of denial, that kind of like repression, there's no space for that. I call them lie detectors because they will not tolerate any degree of artifice or bullshit. Can I curse on this?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, you can fucking curse.
Hell yeah, dude.
You just said one of the myths you wanted to dispel was that these were inherently dangerous, but you also compared them to matches or a car, basically something that could be used recklessly. So let's talk about that a little bit. Like, what do people need to check in for themselves before they have these experiences? Because I feel like everyone has heard about that one person that wasn't like quite right to begin with, then does mushrooms or something, and then their mind broke.
It certainly happens. One thing to note about those sort of types of experiences is that oftentimes there's what's called a latent or a dormant psychosis or mental illness that is brought to the surface by an intense stressor. And sometimes that intense stressor is the death of a family member, a tragic accident, getting mugged or robbed or assaulted in some way. And sometimes it's a psychedelic experience. But oftentimes that sort of underlying condition was there to begin with, and the psychedelic just brings it to the surface. But you asked, what are things that people should be mindful of? People should really check in with what's called their intentions. So why are you going into this experience? What do you hope to get out? And then also do a kind of scan of their relationships and their lives and parse out things that could be addressed to kind of lessen the overall stress. This is something that people should be doing regardless, right? But especially if you're going to undergo a really intense, possibly transformational experience like this, it's really important that you have a read on what could come to the surface and how you plan on dealing with it, with the caveat that there's no way to predict, right?
Do you think some of these, bad trips or so is someone just not able to let go, and it's that inner conflict? Or
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah. Have you ever tried psychedelics?
I've tried mushrooms a few times, but honestly, my stomach hurts so much. I hate feeling nauseous that I could never do it again. But I did enjoy experiencing. It felt like being high, but without the dullness that I feel like marijuana does for me.
That's cool. Something to note, just a quick riff on that experience, if I may. A lot of people really struggle with the body load of mushrooms. A lot of people get really physically uncomfortable. There are hundreds of different psychedelic compounds in the world. Some of them are plant-based, some of them are mushroom-based, some of them are fully synthetic. They all have something to offer, and they all have a really wonderful and different profile.
Interesting. What would you suggest would be the next thing to try if I were going to try something that weren't mushrooms?
I'm really interested in a compound called 2CB. It was synthesized by Sasha Shulgin in the late 70s, and it's based on mescaline, which is a cactus-based psychedelic.
I know what mescaline is,
Yeah. So it's basically, the mescaline molecule altered slightly and fully synthetic. And that one has an incredible therapeutic profile.
Yeah, well, let's take a quick break here. But when we come back, let's talk more about your communal space, Rhizome.
The Explore the Tropics event is in full swing now at Whole Foods Market. It's a celebration of tropical fruits throughout the store, starting with great deals on fresh, juicy seasonal produce. There's a new melty tropical heat pizza only at Whole Foods Market through March. And that famous mango yuzu chantilly cake is finally back in the bakery department. You'll also find tempting tropical marinated proteins in their meat and seafood departments. Explore the tropics today at Whole Foods Market.
So Oregon has decriminalized what were considered like harder substances, and now has also uh, legalized therapeutic psilocybin. But what you're doing isn't exactly recognized by law. Like, what's up with that? Isn't your whole operation just a little risky?
Absolutely. So we fall outside the boundaries of Measure 109 in as much as we're not an approved service center. And we work with a whole spectrum of people, some of whom have licenses and some of whom don't. But we operate somewhere between the below ground and the above ground. And when I say we, I'm speaking about the Rhizome, which is the organization that I run alongside my dear friend and colleague, Evan Segura. We hold a whole variety of containers for people who are using psychedelics in different ways. We're not strictly therapeutic. We also welcome people who use drugs that fall outside of those margins. We're very harm reduction focused. A lot of these clinics have a kind of one track, like therapy, therapy, therapy. We do a really holistic, broad strokes thing, some of which is outside of the boundaries of federal and local law. Yeah.
So how does the introduction of a license process change what you do?
How does the legislation of Measure 109 change what we do?
Yeah, like how is it going to change what you do, or how is it changing what you do?
It's certainly bringing a lot of people out of the woodwork, so to speak, who otherwise wouldn't have known or been interested about these compounds and these techniques. So it's bringing a more mainstream audience, a more kind of, like I call them, the NPR crowd, right? Older, white, upper middle class, liberal people who maybe experimented with psychedelics in their youth, but had no idea that they had this other side to them. So it's broadening our audience, definitely. It's also bringing a level of scrutiny from regulatory boards and legislators that previously we didn't necessarily have to deal with. So it's turning some eyes on operations like ours. We also offer services at the Rhizome that are far less expensive, and everything is offered on a sliding scale because we're committed to economic justice, actually committed to it, not just like a publicity PR thing where you're saying it just to say it and get, brownie points. We are practically and truly committed to economic justice.
It's interesting because, I mean, it's inherently different than, hey, I'm going to go into this doctor's office. Tell me specifically about your space. Like, how is it different from that? And why is it important?
So the Rhizome is a community space that breaks from the typical medical or therapeutic model in as much as we are not that kind of therapeutic office style space. It's a vibrant, living community space. The space is full of artwork and plants. It's not stuffy. It's very homey. Sometimes it's a little messy. And that's what we try to cultivate. We want to make it feel like a home and like a center, like a truly safe space for people to come. A lot of people have been actively traumatized by typical therapeutic containers and medical containers. And a lot of people, especially people of color and marginalized people, carry a deeply felt mistrust for people with a lot of letters after their names and crave a more community-oriented, grassroots approach to their own healthcare.
Yeah, let's talk about that for a sec because I've been finding this interesting. I feel like in every indigenous community or, just community in general has a history of using psychedelics in a communal space. And either it's a shaman or it's like a celebration of sorts. And I just find it like interesting that we have a tendency in I don't know, post capitalism where you're just like, okay, what else can we market and sell? And are we able to get away with, in a sense, even though at the same time people need it. People are the pills aren't working, this isn't working, that's not working. Let's go back to the roots of what people used to do to, kind of heal each other. And I can't imagine that there isn't someone in the Indigenous community right now just being like, oh, I hate all of this. Because just to be like, be forced into schools, to be basically told that what you're doing is barbaric, it is illegal, it is, you're going to, like, literally people died practicing their medicines.
That's absolutely right. And I should be clear that, we are not shamans or practicing in a shamanic space whatsoever. We don't really pull in our personal practices from indigenous traditions because those aren't my people and I can't lay claim to that knowledge. Mm-hmm. What I can do is offer an alternative that's based on my own lived experience for people who look and think like me or who don't look like me but want something that's not that standard medical model. And then you pointed out something really, really important here, which is that this is and was meant to be a communal experience. This is not something that's supposed to be privatized or strictly used in a one-on-one container. So we try to make space for people who seek that kind of experience as well. Don't just want to be sitting in a room with one person. Wish to be in community and wish to be surrounded and held by people that they know and trust. Yeah. It's a really good point. Yeah.
So if someone's listening to this right now and going, hey, this sounds, I want to learn more about it. This forum that you guys are having, Discovering Psychedelics, an intro and community forum. Tell me about it, like when it's going to happen and what people can get out of it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Shouts out to Noah Heller. We're putting on an event on the 28th at the Clinton Street Theater at 6:30 p.m. It is called Discovering Psychedelics, an intro panel. It's going to be myself and a series of brilliant colleagues and friends of mine presenting on various topics related to psychedelics. But this event in particular is really geared toward curious people who are just starting on their psychedelic journeys and want to know more. And I personally am presenting on psychedelic history and policy. So I'm going to be talking a bit about how the laws have changed over time, how the culture has changed over time, where we are now versus where we were 5 years ago, 20 years ago, etc. And yeah, just really mapping out a timeline, because these, along with every single one of these drugs, comes a really rich and interesting history. And people who seek to be in relationship with them owe it to themselves to learn a bit about where they came from, perhaps where they're going, and certainly where they are right now.
Well, thanks again, Gabe, for making time to speak with us. This was a really interesting conversation. To be honest, I wish we didn't have to stop talking, but we have work. We have other things.
No, I got you. Yeah,
I know you do too.
Totally. Thank you so much, Claudia. It was really wonderful speaking with you.
And now for your microdose of news. Multnomah County has delayed plans to quickly move 300 people off the streets of Old Town and the Central East Side into housing. Now, the county had successfully tested the idea last year and housed about 100 people by paying their rent and security deposits. The county blames their slow action on delays in state funding, but will move ahead with just 100 people by the end of June. And in devastating news, Walter Cole, also known as legendary drag queen Darcel 15, passed away last Thursday at 92 years old. She was considered to be the oldest working drag queen in the world, having been crowned so by the Guinness World Records back in 2016. Now, if you're interested in learning more about this celebrated Portland icon, we'll be re-airing a special episode tomorrow that documents Walter's transformation into Rose City's grandest dame. We're gonna miss you, Walter. That's all for today here on CityCast Portland. If you enjoyed this show, why not tell a friend, rate, or leave us a review? We'll be back tomorrow morning with more from around the city. Until then, see you at Slim's.